The marble floor was cold against his cheek, and everyone just watched. Harold Jenkins lay there for what felt like an eternity, though it couldn't have been more than 8 seconds. 8 seconds of staring at polished Italian marble, watching expensive shoes shuffle past him, hearing whispers and the soft click of phone cameras. 8 seconds of remembering every moment in his 67 years that had led to this one. He had walked the streets of Detroit for over 40 years. He knew this city like he knew his own heartbeat. The honking taxis on Woodward Avenue, the distant echo of Motown classics drifting from corner bars, the smell of deep-fried everything wafting from food trucks near the riverfront. Detroit had raised him, challenged him, and shaped him into the man he was. A man who had spent 32 years as a city planner, who had helped redesign neighborhoods, who had sat in meetings with mayors and developers and community leaders. And now he was on the floor of an apartment building lobby, his cane 6 feet away, his hips screaming in pain, and not a single person moving to help him. The building on Woodward Avenue had caught his eye 3 months ago, a newly renovated complex, modern but with hints of classic Detroit charm. Brick walls that reminded him of the old factories his father used to work in. Wrought iron balconies like the ones his mother used to hang laundry from in their old neighborhood. Polished wooden doors that spoke of craftsmanship and care. He had called the leasing office that morning, spoke to a pleasant woman who scheduled him for a 5 o'clock tour. He had put on his best coat, the charcoal gray one his wife Lillian had bought him for their 40th anniversary, 3 months before the cancer took her. He had polished his shoes. He had arrived 10 minutes early because Harold Jenkins was never late for anything. The young man at the front desk had looked up when Harold walked in, white, mid-20s, with slick-back hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. His name tag read Marcus Webb, leasing specialist. Marcus had looked at Harold's coat, then at his shoes, then at his cane, and something in his expression shifted. "Can I help you?" The tone suggested he doubted it. Harold had smiled politely. "I have a 5 o'clock appointment, tour of the available units." "Do you have confirmation?" Harold pulled out his phone, showed the email. Marcus barely glanced at it. "I see. Well, before we proceed, I should mention that management has a policy." Marcus stood, positioning himself between Harold and the inner door. "No walking sticks allowed in the lobby area." Harold blinked. "Excuse me." "Walking sticks, canes, whatever you want to call it." Marcus gestured at Harold's cane with obvious distaste. "It's a liability issue, insurance purposes." "Young man, this is a mobility aid. I need it to walk. It's legally protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act." Marcus's smile tightened. "Sir, I don't make the rules, I just enforce them. You're welcome to leave it outside and—" "I'm not leaving my cane outside." "Then I'm afraid I can't let you in." By now, other people had noticed. A woman in yoga pants waiting for the elevator. A man in a business suit checking his mail. An elderly Asian woman stepping out of the elevator, her eyes meeting Harold's for just a moment before looking away. Harold took a breath. 40 years of navigating a world that often didn't want him. 40 years of staying calm when calm was the last thing he felt. He stepped forward anyway. "I have an appointment. I am coming inside." That's when Marcus moved. Not a gentle redirection. A shove, 2 hands against Harold's chest, hard enough to send a 67-year-old man with a bad hip stumbling backward. His cane clattered from his grip, spinning across the marble. His feet tangled, and then he was falling. The impact sent pain shooting from his hip down his entire leg. The old injury, the one from the car accident 15 years ago, the one that had given him the cane in the first place, flared with a vengeance. His palms slapped the cold floor. His cheek pressed against marble that probably cost more per square foot than his first apartment's rent. And everyone watched. The woman in yoga pants took a step back. The man in the suit suddenly became very interested in his mail. The elderly Asian woman stood frozen by the elevator, her hand covering her mouth. Marcus stood over him. "Sir, you need to leave before I call security. You're causing a disturbance." Harold lay there, breathing through the pain. He could feel his wife's wedding ring on the chain around his neck, pressing against his chest. He could hear Lillian's voice in his memory, steady and strong. "Don't give them the satisfaction of seeing you break." He didn't break. Slowly, painfully, Harold pushed himself up. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his cane. His jaw tightened, not from the physical pain but from something deeper. Something that had been forged over 67 years of being underestimated, dismissed, and pushed aside. He straightened his coat, the charcoal gray one Lillian had given him. He gripped his cane, the worn wooden handle smooth under his palm. He looked directly at Marcus Webb. And he said quietly, so quietly that only Marcus could hear, "You will regret this." Marcus smirked, but something flickered in his eyes just for a moment. Harold didn't leave. Instead, he pulled out his phone and dialed the building manager directly. The number was on the website listed under Management Inquiries. It rang 3 times before a woman answered, her voice clipped and professional. "Susan Miller." "Ms. Miller, my name is Harold Jenkins. I just had an altercation with your leasing agent. He physically pushed me to the ground." Silence. Then, "Mr. Jenkins, yes, I've been informed there was a misunderstanding. I don't tolerate complaints like this lightly. Why are you still there?" "I want to see the apartment. I am signing a lease today, cane or no cane." A longer pause. When Susan spoke again, her voice had changed, softer, almost teasing. "Meet me in the lobby tonight, 8 o'clock, alone, no one else around." Something about her tone made Harold's skin prickle. "Why alone?" "Because, Mr. Jenkins, what I'm about to offer you requires privacy." A pause. "Unless you'd rather walk away, forget this ever happened, go home and nurse your bruised pride." Harold's grip tightened on his cane. "I'll be there." "I know you will." The line went dead. Harold stood in that lobby for a long moment, the pain in his hip fatting to a dull throb, the humiliation burning in his chest. The other witnesses had scattered. Marcus had disappeared into a back office. The lobby was empty and silent, the expensive art on the walls staring down at him like judgmental eyes. He looked at the elevator, at the polished doors, at the building that had rejected him. Then he looked at his cane. He would be back at 8, and somehow he knew that when he walked through those doors again, everything would change. The lobby was empty when Harold returned at 8 o'clock, too empty. The doorman's station stood vacant. The receptionist's desk was dark, the computer screen black. Even the soft jazz that had played earlier was gone, replaced by a silence so complete that Harold could hear his own heartbeat. Something was wrong. He stood just inside the entrance, his cane gripped tightly, scanning the space. The same expensive art lined the walls. The same marble floor stretched before him, still showing the faint scuff marks from where he had fallen. But the building felt different now. Heavier, older, like it had shed a skin and revealed something underneath. Harold approached the front desk. That's when he saw it. A small envelope, cream-colored, with his name written in neat handwriting across the front. Not printed, handwritten, as if someone had taken the time to make it personal. He opened it carefully. Inside was a brass key, old-fashioned, the kind that belonged in a building from another era, and a note written in the same careful script. "Use it wisely. What happens inside is your choice." No signature, no explanation. Every instinct Harold had developed over 40 years in city planning, every lesson he had learned about reading people and situations, told him to leave. To walk out the door, go home, and forget this building existed. File a complaint with the housing authority. Let lawyers handle Marcus Webb. But something else pushed back. The memory of lying on that cold marble floor, the smirk on Marcus's face, the way everyone had watched and done nothing. Harold was tired of walking away. He pressed the elevator button. The doors opened immediately, as if the building had been waiting for him. Inside, the lighting was dim. An old Motown played faintly through crackling speakers. Marvin Gaye's voice, distant and distorted, singing about mercy. Harold stepped in. Before he could press a button, the number 4 lit up on its own. He hadn't touched it. The elevator rose slowly, creaking in a way that new buildings shouldn't creak. When the doors opened, Harold found himself in a hallway that felt wrong. The corridor stretched before him, lined with expensive art pieces that seemed different from the ones in the lobby. Classical paintings mixed with modern abstracts, some featuring faces so lifelike they seemed to follow him as he walked. One portrait stopped him cold, a woman dark-haired with sharp eyes and a knowing smile. The style was vintage, the frame antique, and in the corner a small plaque read, S. Miller, 1952. Susan Miller, the building manager he had spoken to on the phone. But if this portrait was from 1952, that would make her over 90 years old. The woman on the phone had sounded 50 at most. Harold's unease deepened. He continued down the hallway, his cane clicking against hardwood floors, until he reached apartment 4B. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of light spilling into the corridor. He hesitated for a full 5 seconds, then pushed the door open with his cane. The apartment was immaculate, unlived in, furniture arranged perfectly, still wrapped in plastic like a showroom display. The windows offered a stunning view of the Detroit skyline, city lights twinkling against the night, but something about the space felt staged, artificial, like a photograph someone had stepped into. On the coffee table sat a stack of papers. Harold approached, his hip protesting with each step. A lease agreement, professionally printed, every clause and condition laid out in precise legal language, and on the signature line typed neatly, Harold T. Jenkins. They had been expecting him, not just tonight, for longer than tonight. "You came." Harold spun. The door had closed behind him without a sound, and standing in front of it was Susan Miller. She was tall, elegant, dressed in a black suit that fit her like armor. Her hair was silver gray, pulled back severely. Her eyes were dark, watchful, and utterly unreadable. She stood with her arms crossed, studying him the way a scientist might study a specimen. "Ms. Miller, I presume." "You presume correctly." She didn't move from the door. "I see you found the key." "I found a lot of things, including a portrait of you dated 1952. Something flickered across her face, amusement, recognition. "Art can be deceiving, Mr. Jenkins, so can first impressions." She nodded toward the lease on the table. "You said you wanted to sign. The paperwork is ready." Harold looked at the lease, then back at Susan. "Why me? You have a waiting list for this building. Why go through all this for one potential tenant?" Susan smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. "Because you didn't leave when you should have. Because when Marcus pushed you to the ground, you got back up. Because most people in your situation would have gone home to nurse their wounds and write angry letters to management." She stepped closer, her heels silent on the floor. "But you called me directly. You demanded a meeting. You walked into this building at night alone, with nothing but a cane and your pride." She stopped 3 feet from him. "That kind of determination is rare, Mr. Jenkins, and I have uses for rare things." Harold's skin prickled. "What kind of uses?" Susan gestured toward the lease. "Sign it, and you'll find out. Or leave now, forget any of this happened, and spend the rest of your years wondering what was behind that door." She paused. "Your choice." Harold looked at the document. Every instinct screamed trap. But he thought about Marcus's smirk, about the cold marble floor, about Lillian's voice in his memory telling him that the fights worth fighting were the ones that scared you. He picked up the pen. As he signed his name, he noticed something in the corner of the ceiling, a tiny red light blinking steadily. A camera. Hidden, but not hidden enough for someone who had spent 3 decades analyzing building plans. He was being recorded. This moment was being documented. He signed anyway. Susan took the lease, examined his signature, and nodded. "Welcome home, Mr. Jenkins." That night Harold moved in. The apartment came furnished, which should have been a convenience but instead felt like wearing someone else's clothes. Everything was too perfect, too arranged. At 2:47 a.m. he woke to strange sounds in the walls, scratching, tapping, like fingernails against drywall coming from inside the structure itself. At 3:15 a.m., whispers in the hallway. He pressed his ear to the door and heard voices, indistinct but urgent. When he opened the door, the corridor was empty. No one there. At 3:33 a.m., the smell of smoke drifted through the apartment. Not cigarette smoke, something older. Wood smoke, like a fireplace burning in a building that had no fireplaces. At 4:00 a.m., his phone buzzed. An unknown number, a single text message. "They're watching you too." Harold sat up in bed, heart pounding. He looked out the window at the street below. A figure stood on the opposite sidewalk, barely visible in the shadows between streetlights. A man, Harold guessed from the build, standing completely still, looking up at his window. And in his hand, held at his side, was a cane, identical to Harold's. Harold watched until dawn, but the figure never moved. And when the sun finally rose over Detroit, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, the sidewalk was empty, as if no one had been there at all. 1 week in apartment 4B, and Harold had learned that the building had a rhythm, a wrong rhythm. Tenants avoided him in the hallways. Not obviously, not rudely, but with the kind of practiced distance that suggested they had been warned. Conversations would stop when he approached the mailboxes. Eyes would slide past him in the elevator. The building manager's office was always closed when he tried to visit. And then there were the rumors. Mrs. Patterson in 3C mentioned to another tenant, just loud enough for Harold to hear, that she had seen him wandering the corridors at 3 in the morning, standing outside her door, just standing there. Mr. Okonkwo in 2A told the doorman that Harold had been knocking on his door at midnight, asking strange questions about the building's history. But Harold never left his apartment at night, not once. Someone was pretending to be him, or the building was lying. He started documenting everything. A small notebook, purchased from a corner store 3 blocks away where no one knew him. Times, dates, observations. The black SUV that parked outside every Thursday at exactly 9 p.m. The delivery trucks that arrived at 3 a.m. with no company logos. The way Susan Miller's office light was always on at midnight but dark by sunrise. He was building a case. He just didn't know what for yet. The break came on the 8th day. Harold had been in the kitchen making coffee when he noticed something wrong with the pantry. His city planning instincts, dormant for years but never truly gone, kicked in automatically. The room's dimensions were off. The back wall was too close. According to the building's floor plan, which he had memorized from public records, there should have been another 3 feet of space. He tapped the wall, hollow. His heart began to pound. It took him 20 minutes to find the hidden latch, disguised as a decorative molding near the floor. When he pressed it, a section of the wall clicked and swung inward, revealing a door that had no business existing. Harold stepped through. The room was small, maybe 8 feet by 10, with no windows and a single flickering fluorescent light. Filing cabinets lined every wall, floor to ceiling, old metal ones with brass handles. On a small desk in the center sat a laptop, still open, screen dark but not off. Harold touched the trackpad. The screen flickered to life. What he saw made his blood run cold. Live camera feeds, dozens of them, every apartment in the building displayed in a grid of small windows. Living rooms, bedrooms, bathrooms, nothing was private. Every tenant in the building was being watched, recorded, documented without their knowledge or consent. The feed stretched back years. Harold scrolled through the archives, his horror growing with each click. Recordings dated from 2019, 2020, 2021. Thousands of hours of footage, lives captured without permission. But the cameras were only the beginning. The filing cabinets held something worse. Harold opened the nearest drawer and found folders, thick ones organized alphabetically by tenant name. He pulled one at random. Mrs. Patterson, 3C. Inside was everything: her medical records, her bank statements, photographs taken through her windows, notes on her daily routine, her visitors, her phone calls. A section titled Vulnerabilities listed her chronic pain, her estranged daughter, her fear of losing her apartment. Every tenant had a file. Every file was a weapon. Harold's hands trembled as he searched for his own name. He found it in the J's, a folder thicker than he expected for someone who had lived there only a week. Inside was the Kane incident, documented in clinical detail. Photographs from at least 4 different angles, timestamps, analysis of his emotional state, a transcript of his call with Susan Miller, notes predicting his likely responses to various provocations. And on the last page, stamped in red ink, RECRUITED Phase 1 complete. Harold sank into the desk chair, the folder clutched in his shaking hands. He understood now. The humiliation in the lobby hadn't been random. Marcus hadn't been a rude employee having a bad day. Everything, from the first phone call to the mysterious key to the lease he had signed, had been orchestrated. He had been selected, tested, manipulated into exactly this position. But why? He kept searching. In a drawer labeled Operations, he found ledgers that referenced similar programs in Chicago, Atlanta, Houston, Philadelphia, Miami, Los Angeles. Detroit was described as the pilot site. The building on Woodward Avenue was a testing ground for something larger, a system of surveillance, manipulation, and control designed to be replicated across the country. And Harold's background in city planning, his connections to municipal government, his knowledge of building codes and zoning laws, all of it had made him valuable, either as an asset to be recruited or an example to be made. The laptop contained audio recordings as well. Harold found one dated 3 days before his first visit to the building. He pressed play. Susan Miller's voice filled the small room. "Jenkins is perfect. City connections, old enough to seem harmless, angry enough to cooperate. He'll sign the lease. They always do." A male voice responded, younger, familiar, Marcus Webb. "And if he doesn't cooperate?" Susan's answer was calm, casual, terrifying. "Then he becomes an example, like the others." Others? How many others? Harold found another file. Mrs. Dorothy Chen, the elderly woman who had watched him fall and said nothing. She had lived in the building for 7 years. According to her file, she had tried to report the surveillance in 2019, just months after moving in. Her complaint had been handled. 3 weeks after her report, her husband of 42 years had died suddenly. Heart attack, the official record said. Natural causes for a man his age. But attached to her file was a toxicology report that told a different story. Elevated levels of a compound that shouldn't have been in his system. A compound associated with induced cardiac failure. Mr. Chen hadn't died of natural causes. He had been silenced. And Dorothy Chen hadn't spoken about the building since. Harold photographed everything. Every file, every recording, every piece of evidence he could fit into his phone's memory. His hands were steady now. The shock had transformed into something colder, harder, something that felt like purpose. He was about to leave when he heard footsteps in his apartment. Harold froze. The hidden room had no other exit. If someone found him here with everything he had seen, he would become another example. The footsteps stopped. A voice called out, "Mr. Jenkins, I know you're here." "Marcus Webb." Harold pressed himself against the wall, barely breathing. Through the hidden door, he could see a sliver of his kitchen. Marcus's shadow moved across the floor. "Susan wants to see you, roofed up now." Silence. Harold didn't move. Marcus's voice hardened. "That wasn't a request." More silence. Then the footsteps retreated. The front door opened and closed. Harold waited 10 minutes before emerging, his phone heavy with evidence in his pocket. The apartment was empty, but the message was clear. They knew he was investigating. And now they wanted to talk. 3 months, that's how long Harold waited. 3 months of playing the quiet tenant, nodding politely to neighbors who avoided him, attending building meetings where nothing of substance was discussed, smiling at Susan Miller whenever their paths crossed, watching her watch him, both of them knowing that the other knew. But Harold hadn't been idle. He had spent those 3 months building his case. Every document from the hidden room, copied and backed up to multiple locations. A safety deposit box in a bank across town. A thumb drive mailed to his nephew in Chicago with instructions not to open it unless Harold disappeared. A detailed timeline, cross-referenced with public records and his own observations. He had also spent those months building something else, alliances. It started with Dorothy Chen. 2 weeks after finding her file, Harold had knocked on her door with a plate of cookies, the kind his Lillian used to make. Dorothy had been suspicious at first, barely opening the door, but Harold had been patient. He visited again the next week and the week after that. He never mentioned the building, never asked questions, just talked about Detroit, about the old days, about losing a spouse and learning to live alone. On the 4th visit, Dorothy had invited him in for tea. On the 6th visit, she had started crying. "They killed my Henry," she whispered, her teacup trembling in her hands. "I know they did, but I can't prove it and no one believes me and I'm so scared, Mr. Jenkins. I'm so scared all the time." Harold had taken her hand. "I believe you," he said, "and I'm going to prove it." Dorothy wasn't the only one. Over 3 months, Harold had quietly identified other tenants who had been targeted, manipulated, or silenced. Mr. Okonkwo, whose business loan had mysteriously fallen through after he complained about water damage. Mrs. Patterson, whose estranged daughter had suddenly stopped returning calls after she mentioned seeing strange men in the hallway. 6 tenants in total, all with stories that didn't add up, all with files in that hidden room. Harold had met with each of them individually, shared what he knew, built trust. And then he had shared his plan. The fire alarm went off at 2:47 a.m. on a Thursday night. Tenants flooded into the street, groggy and confused, wearing robes and pajamas. The doorman directed everyone to the designated assembly point across the street. Fire trucks arrived within minutes, lights flashing, sirens wailing. Harold moved with the crowd, but his eyes were searching. Susan Miller was not outside. Neither was Marcus Webb. And in the alley beside the building, engine running, sat the black SUV. Harold slipped away from the crowd. No one noticed. He was just an old man with a cane, moving slowly toward the building's side entrance. The door that maintenance used, the one that didn't have cameras because he had checked. Inside the building was chaos, alarms blaring, sprinklers activating on random floors, the perfect distraction. Harold took the service stairs. 5 flights, his hips screaming with every step. He had prepared for this, done exercises to build his strength, but age was age. By the time he reached the rooftop access door, he was drenched in sweat and his hands were shaking. He pushed through anyway. The rooftop was cold, wind whipping across the open space. Detroit stretched below, a tapestry of lights and shadows. And there, silhouetted against the skyline, stood Susan Miller. She wasn't alone. 2 men flanked her, large and silent, the kind of men who got paid to solve problems. Susan herself held a flashlight, clicking it on and off in a pattern. 3 short, 2 long, 3 short. A signal. In the alley below, the SUV's headlights flashed in response. Harold pressed himself into the shadows behind an air conditioning unit, watching. The SUV began to pull away. Through its tinted back window, Harold caught a glimpse of the passengers. Marcus Webb, dressed in a suit now, looking nothing like the leasing agent who had shoved an old man to the ground. Beside him, men in expensive clothes carrying briefcases. On one of the briefcases, illuminated briefly by a passing streetlight, was a corporate logo, Vanguard Asset Recovery. Harold had researched that name. A private investigation firm with contracts across 6 states. Officially, they helped corporations recover stolen assets and investigate fraud. Unofficially, according to lawsuits that had been quietly settled, they specialized in blackmail, surveillance, and making problems disappear. The building on Woodward Avenue wasn't just an apartment complex. It was a laboratory, a testing ground for techniques that Vanguard planned to deploy nationwide. And Susan Miller wasn't just a building manager. She was an architect. Susan lowered her flashlight and turned. Harold held his breath. "You can come out now, Mr. Jenkins." His blood froze. "I've known you were there since you opened the stairwell door." Susan's voice carried across the rooftop, calm and almost amused. "Did you really think you could sneak up on me in my own building?" Harold stepped out from behind the air conditioning unit. There was no point in hiding. Susan smiled when she saw him, the same smile from their first meeting, the one that didn't reach her eyes. "You've been busy these past 3 months," she said, "talking to tenants, building alliances, photographing my files." She tilted her head. "Did you think I didn't notice?" "I think you noticed everything. That's the point, isn't it? You watch, you collect, you control." Susan's smile widened. Finally, someone who understands. She walked toward him, her heels clicking against the concrete. The 2 men stayed where they were, watching. "I left that room for you to find, Harold, the files, the recordings, all of it. I wanted you to see what we've built, because you're exactly the kind of person we need." Harold's grip tightened on his cane. "You want me to join you?" "I want you to understand the opportunity. Your city planning connections, your knowledge of municipal systems, your reputation as a quiet, respectable man. With you on our side, we could expand into government housing, public developments, entire neighborhoods. The information we could collect, the leverage we could build, it would be unprecedented." Harold stared at her. "You're insane." Susan's smile flickered. "I'm practical. The world runs on information, Harold, on secrets. The people who control secrets control everything. We're just making that system more efficient. By spying on innocent people, by killing anyone who threatens you." Susan's expression didn't change. "Henry Chen had a heart condition. These things happen. His toxicology report says otherwise." For the first time, something cold entered Susan's eyes. "You've been thorough, I respect that." She stopped 5 feet from Harold, arms crossed. "So here's my offer. Join us, use your connections to help us grow, and you'll be protected, comfortable, powerful, or refuse and suffer an unfortunate accident. An old man with a bad hip falling down the stairs. Such a tragedy." Harold looked at the 2 men behind her, at the rooftop edge, at the long drop to the street below. He thought about Lillian, about her voice in his memory. The fights that matter aren't the ones you win with fists. They're the ones you win by outlasting them. He touched the ring beneath his shirt. And then he smiled. Susan's eyes narrowed. "Something funny." "Just something my wife used to say." Harold straightened, leaning on his cane. "She told me that bullies always make the same mistake. They assume everyone is as alone as they make them feel." Susan's expression flickered, confusion. "Did you really think I came up here alone?" Behind Susan, the rooftop access door opened. Dorothy Chin stepped through, phone held high, camera recording. Behind her came Mr. Okonkwo, Mrs. Patterson, and four other tenants, all of them holding phones, all of them filming. Susan spun, her composure cracking for the first time. "What is this?" Harold stepped forward. "This is what happens when you underestimate people, when you push them down and assume they'll stay down." He pulled out his own phone. On the screen, a recording app had been running for the past 10 minutes. Everything Susan had said, every word about surveillance and secrets and making problems disappear, was captured. "I've been wearing a wire for 3 days, Susan. Federal agents have been listening to every conversation. They have your files, your recordings, your connection to Vanguard." In the distance, sirens began to wail. Not fire trucks this time, police, getting closer. Susan's face went pale. "You've been playing chess for 40 years, Susan. But so have I." Harold gripped his cane and met her eyes. "And I've been waiting for exactly this moment." The sirens arrived in a symphony of red and blue, painting the Detroit skyline in colors of justice. Susan Miller didn't run. There was nowhere to go. She stood frozen on that rooftop, surrounded by the tenants she had monitored, manipulated, and terrorized, watching her empire crumble in real time. The two men who had flanked her melted away the moment the police cars appeared, disappearing into the building's shadows like the cowards they were. Dorothy Chen kept filming. Her hand was steady now. After 3 years of silence, 3 years of grief and fear and watching the people who killed her husband walk free, she finally had her voice back. Tears streamed down her weathered cheeks, but she didn't look away. The FBI arrived with the Detroit police. Harold had contacted them a week ago, after he had gathered enough evidence to make the case undeniable. Agent Williams, a serious woman with graying temples and sharp eyes, had been skeptical at first. An elderly man claiming a luxury apartment building was the hub of a nationwide surveillance conspiracy. It sounded like paranoia. Then Harold had shown her the files, the recordings, the connection to Vanguard asset recovery. She had stopped being skeptical after that. Susan Miller was read her rights in front of the tenants she had controlled. She didn't struggle, didn't cry, just stared at Harold with an expression of cold disbelief as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. "You were supposed to be broken," she whispered as they led her past him. "You were supposed to be just another old man who gave up." Harold met her gaze. His voice was steady, quiet, and utterly calm. "You can't break what's already been forged in fire." They took her away. The rooftop fell silent. The black SUV was intercepted 2 blocks from the building. Marcus Webb and the Vanguard executives were arrested without incident, too stunned to resist. The briefcase they carried contained files on 47 buildings across 6 states. Thousands of tenants had been surveilled, their secrets harvested, their vulnerabilities cataloged for future exploitation. Detroit had been the pilot program, a test run before nationwide expansion. It ended in handcuffs and federal charges. Harold was in the lobby when they brought Marcus through, the same lobby where he had fallen, the same marble floor that had been cold against his cheek. He stood near the entrance, leaning on his cane, and watched as the young man who had shoved him was led past in restraints. Their eyes met. Harold didn't gloat, didn't smirk, didn't say a word. He just stood there, quiet and dignified, exactly the man he had always been. Marcus looked away first. The consequences came swiftly. News of the arrest spread across Detroit within hours and went national by morning. Elderly whistleblower exposes nationwide tenant surveillance ring. Harold's face appeared on every news channel, though he refused all interview requests. The story was bigger than him, and he had no interest in becoming a celebrity. Vanguard asset recovery was dissolved within the week. Federal investigators found evidence linking the company to similar operations in 8 cities. 14 executives faced RICO charges, fraud, conspiracy, and in 3 cases, suspicion of wrongful death. Susan Miller was denied bail. Her attorney argued that she was a professional woman with no prior record, but the judge had seen the files, had listened to the recordings, had read the toxicology report on Henry Chen. She would spend the rest of her life in prison. The video of Marcus Webb shoving Harold went viral. Someone from the lobby that first day had posted their footage, and within a week it had 50 million views. Comments poured in from around the world. Outrage, solidarity, demands for accountability. Marcus Webb cooperated with investigators, hoping to reduce his sentence, but the video followed him everywhere. His name became synonymous with arrogance and cruelty. He would never work in property management again. He would never escape what he had done. For Dorothy Chen, justice came with an exhumation order. Her husband's body was examined by independent forensic specialists. The toxicology report, the one Harold had photographed in that hidden room, was confirmed. Henry Chen had not died of natural causes. 3 former Vanguard operatives were charged in connection with his death. Dorothy wept when they told her, not tears of grief this time, something different, something that felt like release. "I was silent for 3 years," she told Harold, sitting in his apartment with tea growing cold between them. "I watched them destroy my life, and I said nothing because I was afraid. You gave me my voice back." Harold took her hand, the same way he had taken Lillian's hand through all those years of marriage. "You always had your voice, Dorothy. You just needed someone to listen." Weeks later, a young journalist from the Detroit Free Press requested an interview. She was black, early 30s, just starting her career. She had followed the story from the beginning and wanted to understand the man behind it. Harold almost refused, but something about her reminded him of Lillian, the determination in her eyes, the quiet strength in her voice. So he agreed to one conversation, off the record. They sat in his apartment, the Detroit skyline visible through the windows, and she asked the question everyone wanted answered. "Mr. Jenkins, after everything they did to you, the fall, the humiliation, the threats on your life, how do you feel now?" Harold was quiet for a long moment. He looked at his cane, leaning against the chair, at the ring on the chain around his neck, at the city he had loved and served for over 40 years. "I didn't do this for revenge," he said finally. "I did it because when I was lying on that floor, I made a promise to myself. I promised I would stand up, not just for me, but for everyone they tried to silence." He touched the ring beneath his shirt. "My wife used to say that the loudest voices aren't always the strongest. Sometimes strength is just refusing to stay down." The journalist nodded, scribbling notes she would never publish. Harold's words weren't for the public. They were for her. "I just wanted to be treated fairly," Harold said. "That's all any of us want." 1 year later, the building on Woodward Avenue was transformed. Ownership had been transferred to a community housing trust, seized from Vanguard as part of the federal settlement. The luxury apartments became affordable housing for Detroit seniors, the very population that had been targeted for exploitation. They renamed it the Lillian Jenkins Building. Harold attended the dedication ceremony, standing in the lobby he had once been thrown out of. The marble floor had been replaced with warm hardwood. The intimidating art was gone, replaced with photographs of the neighborhood's history. A plaque hung near the entrance, bronze and simple. "Dignity cannot be taken, it can only be surrendered. Harold Jenkins." Dorothy Chen served on the tenant board. Mr. Okonkwo ran a small business from the ground floor. Mrs. Patterson's daughter had reconnected with her, and they had lunch together every Sunday. The building had become what it should have been from the beginning, a home. Harold lived there for another 3 years. Quiet years, peaceful ones. He never sought fame or recognition. He attended building meetings, helped neighbors with small repairs, and spent his evenings on the wrought iron balcony, watching the sun set over the city he loved. When he passed peacefully in his sleep at the age of 70, the entire building mourned. The funeral was standing room only. But in Detroit, a legend had already begun to grow. Tenants in the Lillian Jenkins building would tell stories to newcomers about the man with the cane who had been pushed down and refused to stay fallen, about the night he stood on a rooftop and brought an empire crashing down, about the quiet dignity that had been more powerful than all the surveillance and manipulation in the world. And sometimes on quiet nights when the lobby was empty and the elevators were still, tenants would swear they heard something. Faint, rhythmic, the soft click of a cane on hardwood, and then barely a whisper floating through the halls. I see everything. Not a threat, a promise, a reminder that someone was still watching, still protecting, still refusing to let the powerful prey on the powerless without consequence. Harold Jenkins was 67 years old when he was pushed to the ground. They thought he was weak. They thought he was alone. They thought he would break. They were wrong. Some people, when knocked down, learn exactly how to get back up. And sometimes, the people who look down on you today are the same ones looking up at you tomorrow. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that better days are coming, if it made you believe that justice still exists in this world, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, your voice matters. Your story matters. You matter. Stay blessed, stay strong, and stay tuned for more stories of unheard Black voices. Do you think justice was truly served, or should the consequences have been harsher? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one.